Hi, I'm Wakkabi, and this is my first video, so I'm going to be a little bit nervous, probably more than I should be, and I already know that I'm going to be fidgeting and doing weird stuff with my hands more than I need to be, so I just wanted to go ahead and apologize for that. If I keep doing this, hopefully it'll get better, and hopefully it doesn't bother you too much, but if it does, like I said, I hope it'll get better. So this is just a blanket apology for if I do that throughout this video so that I'm not having to stop every 2 seconds to say I'm sorry. So I'm sorry for that. So today I'd like to talk to you about an anime that came out in 2016, about a year ago, give or take, and that is Planetarian, Reverie of a Little Planet. Now, Planetarian is made by Key, and it was based on a visual novel also made by Key. However, Planetarian is one of Key's lesser-known visual novels, and personally, I think that's because, unlike most visual novels, which are somewhat, not open-ended, but you have varying choices at different points. And so even though it's just still images and text, there'll be different points where you can choose an input. You can choose how to respond to another character. You can choose where you go at a given time. You can even choose how you internally feel, and that'll affect how your character acts. And so you have a degree of control, and there's different paths and routes and different endings that correspond to the choices you've been making. But Planetarian is not a true visual novel. It is a subset of a visual novel called a kinetic novel. And what a kinetic novel is it has the same format where it has the still images and text and music in the background, but there's no point at which you have different choices. There's only one route, there's only one path. Everyone who plays it will have exactly the same experience. It's also very short. It only takes about 4 to 5 hours to play, depending on how fast you read. And part of that is because there's only the one route, but even for just one route, that's still relatively short. And I think that might be why it's not quite as popular as some, but I also think that enables them to tell a different kind of story because they don't have to have all these different options. They can have one true story. And so it enables them to tell this simple story, but I think there's a lot to be gained from that simplicity. It also has only 2 characters, which is very different for Key, which usually has the harem genre. And I think the fact that there's only 2 characters enables them to do a lot of really interesting things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But despite the fact that this anime has been out for about a year now, it hasn't been getting as much attention as I think it should, which is why I'm talking about it now. So, since I played the visual novel, I'm a big fan of visual novels, and just to put that out there and be honest, I'm also a really big fan of Key. And so I'm sure I'm a little biased, but since I played the visual novel a good bit before it came out, actually before it was even announced that it was coming out, since I played the visual novel, and I'm a big fan of visual novels and Key in general, I feel that I have a perspective to talk about it both as an adaptation and as a representation, of Key's works as a whole, because there's a lot of things it does differently that I think turns the Key fans off from it. And so it's not as receptive by people who love Key, but also the people who have some problems with Key's traditional format aren't giving this enough consideration for the large part. Not this isn't completely true, but a lot of people aren't giving it as much consideration because they assume it's going to be like every other Key work. But I think it has a lot of different things going for it that even though I love Key as a whole, I think this is something really special. And so in order to be able to make my points, I'm going to give a quick summary of the plot. So obvious spoiler warnings. I don't think I've spoiled anything up till now except that it's an anime. Has 2 characters. You figure that out really fast, so I think it's okay. But from here on, full-on spoilers, I'm going to tell you everything that happens in it just about. If you don't want to know that, and I think you should go experience it yourself first. It doesn't really matter to me if you play the visual novel or watch the anime. I actually might watch the anime first, which isn't what I would usually say. But with this one, I think I might. And the whole anime, every episode, if you watch the whole thing in one go, it's less than 3 hours long. It's basically like watching a movie. It's not that long. Go watch it, come back, or don't come back, but please go watch it either way. And if you've already watched it, it shouldn't matter, so I'm just going to dive right in. So, the basic setup is that it's a post-apocalyptic world, and you aren't given a lot of details into what exactly happened, because it doesn't really matter. We all know various things that can cause the apocalypses. We all know the struggles that come with post-apocalyptic worlds. We've seen a lot of this in other media, and so it doesn't waste a lot of time with the world building of this. It just lets you accept the world is not how it used to be, things are horrible, society has collapsed, and that's all you really need to know for what it wants to communicate. And the main character, who's never given a name, and you never see him in the visual novel, but in the anime they have to depict him, and so they just give him a kind of generic appearance, which I think is right in this case. But the main character seems to be a little bit older, at least he's very hardened. It may not be because he's older, it may just be the world he lives in. But the only thing he's ever referred to as is the junker. Because in this world, people aren't living in the cities, things are collapsed, there's acid rain making it very dangerous to go outside, and there's people called junkers who go and scavenge things from the cities, and that's what he does. And so at one point he's in a city, he's on his own, he used to be traveling with someone, but we don't know too much about that, we just know something happened to this person. They go into it later, but it's not terribly relevant. But he goes into this city, and he has to take shelter in what appears to be an abandoned mall. But it turns out that it's not abandoned, and there's actually a robot there. And the robot welcomes him to this planetarium. They have the title of it different, and sometimes that messes you up. I'm not sure why they made that choice, but that's alright. But the robot welcomes him to the planetarium, is very cheery, is very perky, and he's very thrown off by it, because in this world, robots are very dangerous. A lot of them have gone out of control, there's no one directing them what to do anymore, and so some of them are very dangerous, and he feels initially threatened. But then he comes to realize that it's not a threat, and it's just an annoyance. But even though he considers this robot to be an annoyance, he still has to stay here with it, and he can't quite get it to leave him alone. And what it's saying, you need to come see this show, come to the planetarium, come see the show. And initially he says no, he can't be bothered with it, he has his own problems, but he finally does it just to get her to shut up. Her name is Yumei, by the way, and she is adorable. She is really adorable. But I don't feel like they play up that nearly as much as a lot of the key works do, which I know is some people's complaint about it. She's cute. She's an anime girl. She's gonna be really cute. She's a key girl. She has giant eyes and big hair, and you kind of want to protect her from everything. But I don't feel like they play it up in quite the same way, and personally I'm not too bothered when they do play it up, but I know that that's a lot of people's complaint, and so I think that might make this more accessible to some people who are made uncomfortable by that. But anyway, eventually he says, fine, I'll go see the thing, let's just do this so she'll leave me alone, and he goes to see it, but her projector, who she's personified and introduces as Miss Yuna, her projector won't work. And so he ends up getting roped in, very begrudgingly, to trying to fix the projector. And he finally gets it fixed, and she's really grateful, and she starts to put on the show for him. And as he's being mesmerized and starting to be drawn into this world of the stars that she's telling him about and that he's seeing on the projector, he's starting to begin to appreciate why people might have come here and start to think, this might be something special. But then the projector goes out, and she's devastated. She doesn't understand. She keeps trying to call for help. She doesn't understand that there's no one there. Even though this has been going on for years, she just thinks it must be something with her. She says, I must be broken. This can't be what's actually happening. She thinks that it's just a matter of time before things return to normal, that nothing's really wrong, it's just her. But eventually he says, well, you know what? It doesn't matter that the projector's not working because you can still do the show. And she's kind of unsure about this at first, but she ends up doing it. And he's mesmerized, she's happy, everything's good, until eventually it is time for him to leave. And she offers to escort him to his car, which he's reluctant about, but he finally agrees. And it's kind of a grueling journey. It's a very slow travel. She can't walk very quickly. She's too heavy for him to try to carry because she's a robot. And finally they do make it out, but they encounter this robot called a sand crab. I believe that's what they're called. Might be a fiddler crab. It's some kind of crab. But they encounter this giant robot with machine guns that is attacking him, and he says, I need you to wait here. That's an order. And one of her programs is that she has to obey orders from humans, and so he thinks she will. And he's gone out and he's fighting it, And he's doing pretty well, but then it goes wrong, of course, and he's on the ground, he's about to be taken down, and then here she comes, just walking out in front of him, and she's not trying to fight it, she's not trying to do anything, she's just trying to communicate with it to stop. She can't understand why a robot would possibly be hurting a human, because that's not what they're for. They're meant to be helping humans. She loves humans. She can't understand why this would be happening. And so it blasts her, and there's a scene where he does take it down, but first it does get her because it's not listening to her signals. It's gone rogue. It may or may not even be getting them. And so she's broken from her waist down. There's just nothing there. She's been ripped apart. And she's distressed because she doesn't want him to have to see her like that, because she couldn't do what she was supposed to do. She's still only concerned with trying to help him. But he becomes distressed too, because at this point he started to care about her. And what ends up happening is he tells her this, just as throughout the entire story, various people have been telling her lies, trying to comfort her because they saw her as something that needed to be protected. And the people who used to work at the planetarium told her that everything was okay, that they were going on a vacation, that they would be back, that she just needed to stay there and look after things, when really they were evacuating. And all along, people have been telling her these lies, coming from a good place to try to make her feel better, but they're still lies, and so she's living in this delusion. And he decides to just continue this. He tells her about how all of her friends are waiting, and there's this new planetarium built for her, and she'll have a new body, and she can tell people about the stars and make people happy forever, just like she always wanted, and that he's just going to take her memory chip out and take her back there. And she's so happy, and there's a sad moment where she says, "I wish robots could cry," but she's one of the older models. The newer ones can cry, but she never had the ability to. And as she's saying that, there's rain falling that drips down her face. And so she's kind of happy because she says it's kind of like crying. And it's very sad, which I know is some people's complaints, but I think this does this really well. But he ends up actually taking the memory chip, and you never know what ends up happening. But the idea is that he does want to keep telling stories, that he does want to tell her stories about the stars, and that he thinks there's hope for humanity by looking towards those things, just like she did. And so the overall story of it to me is that while her hope was fake, because it was based on a delusion, she didn't know what was really happening. But he did, and because of that, he was very hesitant to buy into it at first. But eventually, even though he saw how horrible things were, even though he knew how hopeless things seemed, having something to look towards, having something to hope on, the stars, this dream, it gave him something to hope, and that was what she did for him. And so even though she never truly realized, because she had this delusion, she actually said, everything I'm getting, all of my data seems to tell me that this is what's happening, that things have crumbled, but I know that can't be, and so it must be me that's broken. And so over and over again she says, I'm broken, because she would rather believe that she's broken, that she's not functioning, than that these things she's seeing are what's true. And so, even though the hope that she has is kind of empty because it's based on something that isn't true, the hope that he comes to gain through all of this has a lot more meaning to it, because he knows how bad things are. He's lived in that world. He can hardly even remember when things were better. He was a child when it happened. And so he's lived in this horrible, desolate world, but seeing her hope makes him want to hope too. And I think that's part of what's so beautiful about it. It's not about him coming in and saving her, but it's also not just about her being pure and good and helping him see the joy in life and fixing things like a lot of key things can do, which I think there's value to that, but that's not the story this is telling. Everything is bad. Both of them have a lot of problems. And it's not even a romance like a lot of key. Some people might want to insert that if they want, but it's not about guy getting all these girls in love with him and getting with one and having things happen because of that. She's actually a lot more childish, and I feel like their relationship is almost one of just him wanting to protect her. It's not romantic to me. If people want to insert that, I'm sure they do and will. But there's nothing to make that necessarily how it is. There's nothing to even imply that she can experience those kinds of feelings, and he certainly doesn't seem to feel that way. There's none of the typical references to him thinking she's really cute or pretty or anything like that. There's not a lot of shots drawing attention to those things. She doesn't seem to be a romantic or sexual interest at all. She's just this strange thing that he can't understand and comes to understand and then eventually comes to want to protect. And I think one of the big values about that is, because this isn't made to be a self-insertion harem show like a lot of key things are, it's not about, oh look, here's this generic person who could be me, who gets all these great girls, that's the one I want, that's the one I want, oh look at them, they're so cute. And because it's not trying to do that, which is fine, that's fine, I like a lot of those, but because it's not trying to tell that kind of story, it can tell a story about an actual individual who in some ways, even though he doesn't have a name, and even though in the visual novel you never see him, I think in a lot of ways he's more fully realized than a lot of the protagonist in key works, because he's very flawed. He's not this perfect person that everyone loves. Even she can't understand why he's being so mean, can't understand why he's wanting to drink, can't understand a lot of the choices he's making. And in a lot of ways, he's someone who's given up. And like I said, I fully appreciate the standard key format, and I think a lot of good things can be done with that. My favorite anime of all time is Clannad, which fully utilizes that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think, maybe I'll talk about that later, but I don't think that's something that has to detract from the story. But at the same time, the fact that they don't do that here allows them to tell a different kind of story. And as far as the adaptation, one of the things that they did really well, because they're not having to do the traditional visual novel adaptation where you have several routes and you either have to do where you just choose one route but then you're cutting information off, or where you find ways to kind of combine the routes and make things that really don't all happen in the same arc happen within the same universe when they were never meant to, it can cause you to have a lot of just filler things because you're having to decide what to keep in, and it may not flow the same way the original visual novel did. But with this, because they only had the one straight story to depict, they're able to do that really well. And one of the ways I think they did that is by not sticking to the normal, rigid anime episode where every episode is the same length. This is made of 5 episodes, and the shortest one is about 14 minutes long, and the longest one is about 24 minutes long, which is a pretty big difference for that. And they're all different lengths, depending on what's happening in each episode. They just depict the different sections of the story without having to add filler to make it longer or cut things to make it shorter. They just have what they need to have. And I think that really, really well shows what makes this so good. It's just telling one story. It's telling a simple story, but I think a valuable story. And it tells you everything you need to know for the story, but nothing else. There's not a lot of little side stories. There's not a lot of bits just with gags for no reason. It is a straightforward, simple one story. And one of the things within the themes of this story that I think is so good, that I think is part of a reason I really wish people would appreciate it more, because I think a lot of people could appreciate this if they could look past the fact that, oh, it's key, it's just a sad key thing about a cute girl with big eyes, and you just watch it and cry and feel sorry for her and then wish you could make her feel better. But I don't think that's really what happens here. You can get that out of it if you want to, but I think there's a lot more there, and I don't even think that's what they wanted you to get out of it. I know that's a big thing to say I know, and I don't know. But that's not how I felt about it. Because I think a lot of the problems that are being looked into it are just like, she doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know, Yumeme doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know what's going to happen. She has big questions about God, about the afterlife, about all these things. And because she's a robot, we can kind of just accept that we're pretty sure that's not the case, that we're pretty sure things are a lot bleaker than she's hoping, that we kind of think we know we have the answers and that they're not so good. And so we can kind of watch through her process of wondering these things and wanting these things and wishing for these things, even when there's no indication they're real. And I think that gives a really good cathartic process for us to look at how those things are for us as humans through a simpler lens, because it might be easier to analyze it when we're looking at this robot girl than with people. And I think it deals with a lot of the questions that we have as people through a different lens and does a really good job of just showing those questions and how the answers might not be what we want them to be, but how that hopefulness can still be beautiful, but at the same time it almost seems to be telling you that it's not something you need to hold on to, because it doesn't really show her innocence, her willing to believe these things. It doesn't really show it as something good, as something pure, as something to be wanted. It almost sort of shows it as something broken and something sad. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in what it's showing. And I think that's a really interesting view on things that could make you think about some things. And it's just a really good cathartic experience watching this hope that you know isn't going to work out, that you know isn't true. But I think there's something good about that sometimes things don't have to be okay. Sometimes it's not even that we don't have the answers, it's that we do have them and we don't like them. And there's nothing you can do about that. And maybe that sounds very, very bleak, but I think a lot of times that's just the world we're in, just like it's the world she's in. And I think looking at it through that lens and seeing the two different perspectives, and I think that's another reason why it's so good that there's two characters, because you see him who knows there's no hope and who's given up, but who's still in some way trying to find something good in it. And you see her who all she has is hope. She's unwilling to let go of it, even when all of her senses, all of her information are telling her it can't be true. And seeing those different perspectives, I think we can see how we're all a little bit like both of them. And also how neither of those things are quite right. I think it kind of, by having them both here on either side, makes you naturally see this middle ground between them that I think is a lot better. And at the end, I think they eventually kind of come to meet in that middle place. Because what eventually happens in the epilogue section is he can't help her. He can't bring her back. He carries her around always hoping he can, but it's never certain if he can. But what he does instead is he keeps telling those stories, because he has found something that can make people happy, that can give people hope. And that in of itself, even if everything isn't as nice as he'd like it to be, that in of itself can have value. And that might sound bleak, but I think actually there's something really beautiful and good about that. And I think more than just some sob story about a cute girl with big eyes, although she is cute, she does have big eyes. You probably will cry if you watch it. I did, but I cry very easily. Maybe that's why I like Key, I don't know, I hope not. But I think beyond that, this is a really good story about different ways of viewing things and different perspectives and how we can deal with hopelessness without necessarily having to have delusions. And that's what I think about it. Hopefully, if you watch it, maybe you'll see some of those things, maybe you'll see something different, but I still think it's really valuable and something that everyone should watch. So thank you.